Playing games without resistance is kind of pointless. You need challenges so it feels like you're not wasting your time. That's why we have extra modes that act as obstacles. I kind of talked about that last week. You wouldn't expect the difficulties to come from the story though. Stories are easy. Something that gamers take for granted is the choice of games they have available to them. Depending on your personal preference, there's nothing stopping you from filling your library with gameplay-heavy titles or cinematic video games full of cutscenes. The argument of gameplay versus story is a complicated one that I'm not willing to go into today, but all you need to know is that if you really want to play a game that contains a story where you have to stop every 5 minutes to recap what just happened, we've got plenty of those, my friend. Which puts me in a bit of a precarious position because what I like to do when making these videos is explain what I'm talking about. It's like a maths exam, you've got to show you're working, otherwise you don't get that increased sense of self-satisfaction. Also, extra marks, I guess. Not to say that it's impossible to break down some of these stories, but for more complicated plots it takes quite a bit of time to go into detail and, you know, only got a week to make this video. We've all got places to be. Also, no lore. Some games get a lot more complicated when you delve into the behind-the-scenes stuff, but let's just stick to what the game itself tells you. Anything in pursuit of making this more simple. One of the biggest pitfalls when it comes to video game stories that spiral wildly out of control is spreading the story over multiple games. Clearly it's done so you don't have to rush through the plot in the time it takes to play through one video game, but it also means that you're practically forcing players to spend some time playing other games just to understand one game in particular. I bring this up because we'll be seeing more of this later in the video. I bring this up now because BioShock Infinite didn't need a whole series to make things confusing. Like virtually every game ever made, BioShock Infinite starts out pretty simple. You're told you need to find a girl to get rid of some kind of debt, and you're taken to some kind of magical sky city in order to do just that. And it's a great opening act, everyone's happy and blissfully unaware that you're the Antichrist, or that this story is about to get very confusing very quickly. The first sign of things getting perhaps a little bit too complicated for their own good is that Elizabeth can open tears in reality with no regard for time or space. Both leading to symbolic scenes where she opens a rift to 1980s Paris, and vastly confusing ones where she layers a bunch of different realities on top of each other, and suddenly you're in a world where you've died and are a martyr for a revolution. And the revolution see you as a fake and hate you quite a lot. Then there's the fact that Elizabeth goes from being a random girl in a tower to being the adopted daughter of the bad guy, and then the daughter of the main character, and wouldn't you just know it, the bad guy and the main character are the same person and exist in two different universes, and in order for everything to be set right, you need to die so that the bad guy is never created, and I don't know. BioShock Infinite is a game that I had a lot of fun with, and at least in the moment I was keeping up with the story. But in the final couple of acts, everything just falls apart. I'm not sure if the ending is all that great or not, but if I have to look up an explanation of just what went on and still spend a good 30 minutes reading and digesting it, I'd argue you've made your game needlessly complicated. My advice? Stay away from blending alternate realities, it only makes things worse. Hey. Hey man, you doing okay? Yeah, you should trim your beard though. Puzzle games with complicated plots. I never thought I'd live to see the day. Actually, no, that's not such a stretch. Games like Professor Layton build their plot gradually into this ridiculous behemoth that only just about makes sense. But even then, they're more nonsensical than confusing. Hey, given the right setting, there's no reason why you can't weave a ridiculous story of time traveling between multiverses and generally screwing around with forces that are pretty much only there to make your head hurt. I only looked through the plot of one game in the Zero Escape series. That's all I needed. What's interesting about stories that take place in a confined location is that the lack of variety in the setting leads to more time for developing character relations and ultimately drowning the player in exposition. The first game in the Zero Escape series, and the only one I can talk about with any assurance, 9 hours, 9 persons, 9 doors on the DS, sees nearly 10 people trapped on a boat playing a Saw-style game of let's solve these puzzles so we don't get our stomachs blown to pieces, to appease the pyro from TF2 wearing a hoodie who is helpfully called Zero. Like I said, the restricted setting puts all the characters in close proximity to each other, so we can find out that they all have a bit of history with each other, and that this room escape puzzle game is taking its story structure very seriously. Then you find out that this is the second edition of the game the characters are playing, and that the first time around a girl died, but she's now time traveled into the future under the guise of Zero, where she set up a replica of the puzzle that killed her so someone can solve it and save her life in the past. And what scares me the most is there's 2 more games of this. I've heard great things about how the game takes the decisions you make and weaves an intricate plot with multiple endings, but if you're gonna pull something like this, my desire to get invested in this franchise is just maybe later. These games are frankly a little overqualified for a video like this. I'm always worried that if I think too hard about a story that's full of plot twists and moments that ultimately don't make a lot of sense, that I'm filling my head full of information that isn't that useful. With any luck, after this video I will forget about the plots of most of these games. My brain space is valuable, I've got to fill it up with information about passwords and memes. You gotta know your priorities in life. There's certain types of video games that lend themselves better for having hugely complicated plots. I've already mentioned how puzzle games like the Zero Escape series are a bit of a stretch, but at least those games are thematically appropriate. You're talking about things in absolute terms, even if it does get ludicrously convoluted later down the road. Fighting games are an interesting case. There's been lots of different variations, each with their own style of telling a story, that is, if they even have one, but the brutal truth is that, perhaps more than any other genre, the vast majority of people playing a fighting game are there for the gameplay. That doesn't mean that the story shouldn't be engaging, but I'm more licensed to not give a shit. Just line up a bunch of characters for me to beat the living snot out of, and we're good. But no! BlazBlue has ambition. And really great music, can we talk about that instead? It's got guitars and massive choirs and... okay. So there's a group called the Novus Orbis Librarium who are tasked with keeping the world in check after it was nearly destroyed by an angry creature, but nowadays they're trying to hunt down some guy called Ragnar the Blood Edge who keeps destroying their shit, and oh man, he's got great theme music. Can we just take a moment to have a quick list? Fine, I'll keep going. There's magical wars and eras defined by taking down some big threat to society that usually ends up killing half of society on the way down, and really this mix of magic and science is great and all, but I feel like it gives the writers a free pass to do whatever the hell they want. If you want people travelling back in time to be characters in the present when they also exist in the future, you can slam that science get out of jail free card on the table and get away with it. Doesn't make it any easier to understand, and my diminishing by the second knowledge of the series can't even decipher if this makes it more justifiable, but holy shit if these games don't make it hard as all hell to follow what's going on. Especially in a fighting game, it might well be best if you tune the exposition out and just focus on the actual fighting. And the music. Can we listen to the music now? Oh yeah! It's easy to ignore the faults of something you like a lot. You can get this through nostalgia blindness, or maybe you feel a need to defend something you enjoy without openly wondering if these criticisms are valid. It's where it'd be easier if we were all impartial. It's never gonna happen though. I would argue that a lot of the stories I've mentioned so far are easy enough to follow if you really focus on what's going on and maybe read up on the synopsis on wikis and really just give yourself enough time to take it all in. Yeah, the narratives or how they're explained to the player aren't the best, but if you're really pursuing some context to all this game you're playing, you should be able to work it out in the end. If the story is as prominent as in Metal Gear, this becomes a necessity. So the games that make up the Metal Gear franchise are generally some of my favourite that I've ever played. I think MGS2 is one of the most impressive games ever released, and MGS3 is straight up my favourite game. And yet despite this, I don't really think I can defend what is one of the most complicated plot lines in modern media. Put it this way, even though I've played and replayed these games on a number of separate occasions and have even staggered through a few rounds of European Extreme Super Mega Hard Mode, I have little confidence that I know anything about what transpires in the games. Maybe that's why Snake Eater is my favourite. It's cast in the shadow of Cold War espionage, so there's plenty of betrayals and changes in alignment, but it is for the most part the most condensed one of these stories has ever gotten. Take a trip to MGS2 or 4 for example, maybe even MGS5 if you like your plots unfulfilling as well as confusing, and they're the kind of games where you need a pen and paper handy to keep track of everything that's going on. And the story itself is this strange blend of super serious political and social commentary, and damn son, look at my superpowers! This is a series where you play as one of 3 clones of some great super soldier and enlist the help of a robo-ninja called Deep Throat to defeat one of your shirtless clone brothers, only for you to be replaced by a prissy naked child soldier man who takes down the last clone brother despite spending most of his time in a computer simulation, except the previous clone brother's arm is now grafted onto the gunslinger who lost his arm in the first game to the Deep Throat ninja, and then this gunslinger clone brother combo starts controlling every soldier in the world through the use of nanomachines, son, and clone brother number 1 is getting old because cloning is fucking stupid and everyone starts dying and or hooking up with anything that moves and— No! You stay away, the Phantom Pain! Sit in the corner! You had so much story potential and you used so little of it! A sniper who wears skimpy clothes because she breathes through her skin? You think about what you did! I mean, I know the story well enough, but even then I feel the need to read up on it before making a video like this. Clearly I'm the outlier here. From time to time I get accused of not having enough variety in my choices on this channel. Which is fair enough, I have my favourites and I try to include and talk about other games wherever possible, but sometimes titles get left behind, you know? Even so, sometimes when I want to talk about a game that I have no experience of, I'm perfectly okay with doing the necessary research in order to get enough information to have some confidence in what I'm talking about. So, if you want an explanation as to why I've barely talked about Kingdom Hearts in any of my 124 countdowns up to this moment, I guess you could say that I was put off. And not just from putting it in a video, nah. Kingdom Hearts is a franchise that I haven't played almost solely down to what I and many perceive to be a hilariously convoluted storyline that spans more than half a dozen games that from the surface level is very hard to integrate yourself into. Which is amazing because from what I've picked up, these are all very exposition heavy games. Not quite Metal Gear levels, but if there's a story to be told, you can bet your life that any Kingdom Hearts game will do more telling than showing. Good news is that the bits in between where you're slicing bad guys up with keyblades are loved by many, so clearly it's all worth it in the long run. Or at least you'd hope. So at this point I could try and break down this interweaving tangled mess of a storyline, but even after I had 2 very knowledgeable friends explain it as simply as they could, it's still very hard to get to grips with. There's creatures called Heartless who are kind of the bad guys, but then there's actually evil organizations who want to control the Heartless for their own reasons, and I think the bad guy from the first game controls the organization from the second game, and his name is Ansem. Except it isn't, and he's actually some bad guy called Xehanort who keeps possessing people and making them do bad things, which might be explained in one of the side games which, despite being on slightly more exclusive consoles, contain critical information that helps to tie the story together a bit more, and amongst all of this, there's Disney and Final Fantasy characters hanging out with each other. I'm not sure how I'm supposed to take this absurd story seriously that layers plot twists on top of each other pretty much because it can, and yet has Donald Duck as a protagonist. I bet you he's even more confused than I am. This has been RabbidLuigi, and for all the confusion surrounding the plot of Kingdom Hearts, you can't escape the fact that at some point in time they have to release for new games, which Square Enix have helpfully titled Kingdom Hearts 2.8 and 3. At which point piecing all this together is going to resemble one of those conspiracy theory corkboards. I'm sure they're amazing games, but unlike a lot of games out there, playing this and preparing yourself for playing this, it kind of requires a run-up. Got a topic that you'd like me to discuss in a countdown? Leave a suggestion in a comment below and head over to my Twitter where I'll be holding a vote to decide the subject of the next countdown based off the best of your submissions. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey guys, hope you enjoyed that. I won't lie to you, I've done a lot of countdowns up to now. I threw the number 124 around earlier, but this has to be the hardest countdown I've ever made, maybe tied with the TF2 list like a couple of years ago. Any video where I can get away without doing all that much research is a fun time for all, but I spent ages this week reading and rereading plot synopsises, trying to understand them. Not easy, but thanks to everyone who helped me understand some of these games a bit better, even if you kind of failed, but you were supposed to. Anyway, it's really late here, so I'll leave you with the knowledge that my Patreon page and the patrons using it kick ass, and that there's links everywhere on this video to that page. Do what you have to do, I'm gonna go to bed.